Yeah, I'm just gonna mention in Farsi because this is our first kind of English-speaking panel that we will be releasing this with subtitles very soon. But the panel will be in English, but the Q&A, if anyone is kind of more comfortable speaking or kind of putting their questions or comments out in Farsi, they can do so, and I'll be happy to translate. Yeah, so سلام بر همه کسایی که دو روز گذشته با ما بودن. از اونجایی که احتمالاً میدونین این پنل برای همبستگی های فراملی به انگلیسی خواهد بود. ما خیلی زود امیدواریم که این پنل رو با سابتایتل فارسی بذاریم روی یوتیوب، ولی اگر که I guess people, yeah, so that's that. And yeah, it's been really a kind of important point in creating a space where we can just try and practice how would it be to start speaking beyond these kind of constructed borders that are put there and by nations and by those in power, where then it gives an illusion that we are separated and we are isolated and our fights and struggles are unique, and then the kind of power that it shows itself as soon as we see how much we're sharing that pain. And I really also want to kind of emphasize or acknowledge the moment in time that we're holding the spaces like this, but this kind of historically terrifying moment of having a broadcasted genocide in Palestine happening in front of our eyes, and there's a very it seems the grief that we all have been feeling for so long is suddenly have been crystallized, and that there is actually absolute impunity for those who continue to harm and to kill and to destroy. And how can we kind of still find hope, or how can we find ways to still do the work while in a way it seems that there's nothing on the horizon? How can we still give space for the disappointment and the grief and feeling of defeat while we still be optimistic? And I guess it's really hard. So the panel will be kind of hearing from all the panelists for 10 minutes initially, but the goal is really to have this as a conversation, mainly between everyone really in the room. And we have been practicing with finding the balance of keeping everyone's safety, but also kind of allowing for more participation, and it's a balance that we're practicing every year and every day. And so hopefully we would like to have the option of people raising their hands after the initial rounds of inputs and kind of open their mics and speak. But yes, please be mindful, please be respectful, take care of each other and yourselves when speaking or writing any kind of comments or questions. I was just informed that Elif will be joining us very soon. They had something to deal with. Unfortunately, we also were supposed to have Pilar with us today, and sadly, Pilar Emitxin had sad news, a family issue, and I guess I would really like to kind of, when I heard their news, I was thinking we have got in touch for this building a transnational solidarity conversation, and how can we actually show solidarity for someone in very personal issues? How can we do that for each other? How that also needs to be part of the work we want to do. And so yeah, I would like to just honor that and maybe send them kind of strength in going through such a grief and loss. And I will start by introducing all of our panelists, and then all together, and then we can kind of see who would like to start first. So we have Akanksha Mehta, a very dear friend, but also a senior lecturer in gender, race, and culture studies, and the co-director of the Center for Feminist Research at Goldsmiths. Akanksha's research lies in the interdisciplinary of gender, race, and everyday politics and affectives and material cultures, economies, and contours of everyday violence. And she has a forthcoming book called Right-Wing Sisterhood, where she is an interdisciplinary interrogation on the subjectivities of women who are in violent cultural nationalist or settler colonial projects, looking into right-wing women in Hindu nationalist movements in India and the Israeli Zionist settler project in Palestine. We have Elif, who will be joining us soon, a writer and an organizer, curator and translator that works with different cultural institutions, and works preliminary on kind of preserving the depictions of Kurdish life, and also an author of the edited volume that was recently published, She Who Struggles, Revolutionary Women Who Shaped the World, which I really recommend. It's a beautifully edited book. All the articles are quite timely. We have Elisa Franco, Sentis, a human rights defender and the spokesperson for the Feminist Coordinator 8M of Santiago, Chile. And also the Feminist Coordinator 8M is a feminist group in charge of calling the Feminist General Strike on the March 8th. She's also a philosophy teacher and also, as well as a guide to the Chilean National Stadium Memory Site, which is a concentration camp during the military dictatorship that was in Chile. We have Fidaa Zaanin, a Palestinian feminist and gender studies researcher from Gaza. And she's currently based in Berlin and is advocating and dedicating their work to advancing the gender equality and social justice. They have Maya El Ammar, a Lebanese journalist, feminist writer, and a communication professional who's led nationwide feminist media campaigns on issues related to family violence, child marriage, personal status laws, and the kafala system. I don't know if that was a slip. And she's contributing to various independent media outlets and had short kind of opinion videos covering the range of feminist issues since 2018. Through her program that she hosts called Noun. It's a video cast on Daraj Media platform. I will leave the link of this in the chat later. And we also have Sabiha Allouche, which I am very, very thankful to, having stepped in very last minute last night to act as on-hand translator, because obviously we know the importance of being able to speak in mother tongues, and Elisa will have her first kind of 10 minutes input in English, but we just wanted to make sure that we have someone if they prefer to express themselves in Spanish during the Q&A, and Sabiha stepped in, very thankful. She also herself is a lecturer in Middle East Studies at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. And while her research is primarily situated within the feminist and queer studies, she also engages with migration and refugee studies and the literature on desire and social mobility. And when through her research, she puts the language skills to work. And this is an example of volunteering as a translator in a feminist grassroots work. And she also sits on the advisory board of the Kohol Journal, which is a journal on body, gender, and sexuality. So I think, yeah, still just checking if we have Elif, but I guess we can start. I don't know if I don't want to put anyone's spot if anyone wants to go first, but I was also thinking if maybe Fidaa would like to go first, because I know that there are things that she'll be touching on about the current situation in Gaza, and I think that is kind of as a symbolic act of prioritizing, you know, what we have on our plates. Would you be comfortable, Fidaa?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah, so you already introduced me. Thank you for organizing this. We had a few, like 20 minutes ago, an emotional moment. I signed in a bit early and I was overwhelmed that actually we are gathering from all over the globe, and I got very emotional. Yeah. So tough times, I would say. It's really tough, even tough to find time to connect. I come from Gaza, currently based in Berlin, and then being based in Berlin doesn't make things easier. Actually, it makes everything way, way, way harder. We live in a very hostile environment here. All of that while we are watching our families, friends, neighbors, loved ones, the men, the women, the children, the youth, the elderly people of Gaza, those who survived Nakba already, being slaughtered again, while the colonizer is being funded, military aid, political cover, all kind of support that is needed from the Western government is being provided unconditionally to the state of Israel. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird times, I would say. It's not weird, actually. It's horrific times. What we are seeing, what you already mentioned, the impunity, how the state of Israel is acting without fearing any consequences, and they have every right to feel so. I mean, those who are committing genocide, because there are no consequences, no one is being held accountable. It's not new. It's not now since the 7th of October. It's not 2022 or 2021 or 2014 or 2012, then 2008. I'm just mentioning the huge aggressions that were launched on Gaza Strip. I already listed 3 of them, and no one was held accountable back then. Actually, every time that Israel goes and destroys Gaza, slaughters our people, we see that Western governments jump in to save Israel. No one is being held accountable. Pouring money in Gaza for reconstruction, while the occupation, the colonizer responsible for all the atrocities committed in Gaza is not being held accountable. But this time it's so clear because it's broadcasted live, and the pace and the scale of the killing is beyond. It's just like, I don't think the human mind was prepared for something like that. Sometimes I think it's driving me crazy in the literal sense. It's not like just an adjective being thrown around. Like sometimes I think, are we dreaming? The streets, the neighbors that we knew, they just disappeared. Like they vanished. The houses, the memories, the schools, the universities, the people, the soul of the city, Gaza. I mean, what makes Gaza our home? What makes a city a home? Or if it's not for the memories, for the people, for the streets, for the childhood, for all those things. And all of that is being taken away from us at this moment. So we are talking about our past, about our future, And when I say about our future as well, because the state of Israel, or let's say the US genocide in Gaza being perpetuated by the state of Israel, is taking also the potential of any life in the future from Gaza. And this is dangerous. So they are not only targeting us for the moment being, no, they are also targeting the future. So they are killing any potential for life. And for what? And why? Because under 17 years of a blockade, the people in Gaza refused to submit. They refused this pacification, like just accept occupation, don't do anything. And of course, the people did not accept that. So Gaza, of course, it's being punished. And not only, and this is, there is like this moment of clarity now. Everyone is feeling that. I think the grief is beyond what only Gazans are feeling. I see like Arabs, people from different countries, different places, different backgrounds are feeling this kind of grief, mourning that we cannot actually keep up with what's happening. Do we do a campaign about the killing of the 5-year-old Hind Rajab? Then we hear about another family. Then we hear about another incident. Then we hear about the flower massacre. They are not giving us even like a space to process what's happening. And I think we're going to see the effect of that like now and also on the long run. Our bodies are storing a lot of anger, stress, frustration that should be turned eventually into action. We need to escalate the struggle globally to the point that it matches the brutality and the massacres, the genocide that is being committed in Gaza. But yeah, what troubles me the most actually, that at the beginning, how women's rights, let's say the rights of the minorities, were exploited and used to facilitate and justify a genocide. How the audacity of using like our rights, the things that we dedicate our time to defend, to justify a genocide in Gaza. And it is funny because last week it's like the 8th of March, and we were protesting on the street the genocide. We're protesting Taliban in Afghanistan. We are protesting the Iranian regime. We're protesting the privatization of water in Chile. We are protesting all systems of oppression at once, but at the same time we see how these systems are connected. And on the other hand, there were a few demos in Berlin for the 8th of March pro, let's say, pro the genocide. I mean, at this moment you cannot be it's not white or black. There is no gray. It's either white or black. There is no gray zone in the middle. And when you think about that, how like such a revolutionary day can be turned into a day of facilitating a genocide by women or folks who claim, self-proclaimed feminists, and they say that they care about the human rights. The question is, maybe they do, yeah, but the human rights of who? Who is human to them? Are we humans to them? Am I a woman enough to them? How do they see me? Do they consider my right to self-determination something is worth fighting for? And all those questions we need to ask, because the connection here between us, or how do I see that? It's not the fact that if we identify as women or not. There's something beyond that. Yeah, I don't see myself in the same trench with the ambassador of the US in the UN vetoing a ceasefire 3 times. Yeah, so being a woman is not a green card that I'm gonna be in a solidarity with you. I'm gonna look, of course, beyond that. Are you opposing all structures of oppression? Then yeah, then on that top of the pyramid should come settler colonialism. This is what connects me to our comrades, to our siblings in the struggle, not the identity politics. And even if we want to talk about the details of what's happening to women in Gaza, I hate emphasizing only on women, because our men deserve to live. Our elderly people deserve to live. It's not only women and children are being slaughtered. Everyone is being slaughtered in Gaza, regardless of what they do. They are being slaughtered because they are from Gaza. And we received, not received, we saw on the camera, on videos broadcasted live, how women are being firstly disappeared in Gaza, being tortured, being sexually assaulted, not even since October. I mean, on the checkpoints on West Bank, in the prisons, our political prisoners inside the Israeli jails. But how a few incidents are being used, I mean, the sexual assault allegations, to justify a genocide. Of course, this is not acceptable. And we can see how institutional, or let's say colonial feminism, I mean, there are some scholars now that know more about that are researching, so it's ethno-nationalist feminism, how is being advertised as something good, something attractive, something we should sympathize with, feel empathy with, and find a cover for the atrocities that they are committing. And for example, I want to mention an article, I think, wrote by the New York Times. They said something, the lioness of the desert, Israel fearless fighters, and a brigade, I think, of Israeli settlers, women in a uniform. And we reach a point, how is that something that should be celebrated? How? And it is being presented to us, not maybe us, because we are well aware, but such things do appeal to a specific audience. And it is like the Western liberal feminists. And it does make them think again about, they feel they can relate to that. They can relate kind of to that. On the other hand, the dehumanization of Palestinian women, the dehumanization of the Palestinian body, that it is less, we are the other, and hence everything is allowed to happen to us. And we can see this clearly. I mean, at some point, even the institutions that are complicit in the genocide cannot deny that things are happening. They need to report on something, yeah? And the UN published a report a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and in one page, something mentioned about Palestinian women from Gaza are being raped. Those who were abducted from Gaza are being raped. But nothing about holding anyone accountable, nothing from those institutions to get those women outside of the prison, nothing. And on top of that, the way the language is used, allegedly, reportedly, it says a lot about how serious they take us. They do not see us. So me and women who make bombs, or women who make policies that allow bombs to drop on Gaza, we are not in the same trench, definitely.
Thank you so much, Fidaa. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess there's that question of like thinking about those kind of feminism, even the term transnational feminism, is that an umbrella we can all come under? Because what kind of feminism are we talking about? And also, like, are we gonna think about, going transnational, as in, again, are we recentering the nations in that? And that's like kind of something we can think about. Does anyone kind of feel that they would like to go next in response and have their input?
I can go next if you'd like.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here on a Saturday, and, collective solidarity and rage to everything going on in Gaza right now because of the Zionist project, and also because of the world's complicity in it, because I think that's so important. And I think that's what I want to sort of think about transnational connections between violence and settler colonialism, nationalism across the world, but also then how are people resisting and how are feminists resisting across the world as well. My name is Akanksha, and Golcher introduced me in a really wonderful way, because I've known Golcher for so long, and I really want to thank her for bringing us all together. A lot of my research in the last few years, almost a decade now, maybe even more than a decade, has been trying to understand the connections between transnational regimes of violence, really, and particularly through a gendered lens. And so not only a focus on gender, sexuality, race, caste as categories of analysis and power, but also looking particularly at women's politics. The reason I started looking at women's politics were because I realized after doing some initial research that within these larger movements, women are doing a lot of the work, and yet the analysis is missing this, which is not to say that wow, look, women are also so, murderous and violent, and we must bring them to the front, which is to really say that we cannot understand these movements if we do not understand how this work is happening. And so it comes from a place of thinking about countering them, thinking about resistance, thinking about solidarity, thinking about a world without settler colonialism, a world without dispossession, a world without all of these ethno-nationalist projects and state authoritarianism. So I spent a lot of time doing research with the right-wing movement in India, and I'm using right-wing in a very loose way here. Honestly, these are liberal fascist movements coming together. And even when we talk about Zionism, there is this sort of tendency of a lot of feminists to talk about how there's right-wing Zionism, and then there is the more palatable, moderate, liberal versions. But I want to clarify right from the beginning that my research is with women who label themselves right-wing, but the projects of Zionism, of Hindu nationalism, are absolute liberal, fascist, authoritarian, right-wing coming together projects that are rooted in settler colonialism and nationalism, and not simply a small fraction of fringe elements who are doing this. All of Zionism is a problem, and all of Hindu nationalism and upper caste Hinduism as a project is a problem. So just to clarify that. So over the years, some of the research that I've been doing has been picking on these connections that are also rooted in capitalist neoliberal understandings of the world. So for example, the women in both movements that I've been researching for a few years, they both connect deeply online for many, many years. And I've also now started to connect in person. In both projects, a lot of the mobilizations that the women are doing are very everyday mobilizations around education. They create all these so-called spaces of pedagogy and education, trying to bring more and more people into their projects. And we have seen this with the complicity of Israeli universities and Israeli formal education systems, but also with many, many, many informal and everyday ways of how this work is happening within the Zionist project as well as within the Hindu right-wing project. Another aspect that I look at is to think about how they use discourses of charity and humanitarianism in order to sort of do the violence that they do. So for example, in the context of the Zionist project, a lot of the Zionist women kind of spearhead all these plans to do environmentalist, climate-related work, whether it is actually dispossessing and taking land and then making a so-called natural whatever park out of it, or a place to go on hiking. And all of this becomes a way to monitor people within their communities as well as continue to do the violence that they do. Another aspect of it that I think is really important to understand in this sort of transnational connections is the sort of ways in which social networks and friendship networks become a huge part of it. The reason that the Hindu right wing and the Zionist women are very much, involved with each other is also part of this kind of larger building of networks between two absolutely violent groups that are taking inspiration from each other, that are also sort of invoking each other and also so admiring each other and also wishing that they were the other. So, but I don't want to only focus on thinking about these connections, because I also want to speak about how all of this is going on. We know that there are all of these connections between settler colonial, murderous, capitalist, nationalist, fascist, liberal regimes around the world. We've seen these connections come alive more and more and become visible in the last few days, whether it is the Arab nations that are not speaking up, whether it is, the arms exchange that is going on between India and Israel, whether it is complicity of every single system from the UN, from human rights related discourse, etc. But I also want to think about how there is also resistance that is going on that is transnational. And I've been thinking so much about, for example, Kashmiris who are also occupied and colonized by the Indian state, and they have been barred over and over again from even holding prayers in the last few months, because the Indian state is so worried that the space of the prayer in the mosque will become a space of political mobilization against what is happening in the genocide in Gaza, and then relating that to their own occupation and their own colonization that they have been resisting from the beginning. And yet Kashmiris have come out and protested in different ways. And yet Kashmiris, even in 2021, when Israel was bombing Gaza relentlessly, a Kashmiri man left his house, walked to a bridge, climbed up the bridge, and painted Free Palestine, and we stand with Palestine on this bridge. He was arrested immediately after. So there is always that transnational resistance that is going on between people who are occupied by the settler colonial capitalist nationalist states across the world. I'm also thinking of how because Israel as a settler colony relies on the labor of Palestinians, as it has set up an economic system that, that completely dehumanizes Palestinians, but also then makes them completely dependent on Israeli economy. One of the things that has happened after the genocide has been started by Israel is that there has been a shortage of workers. And what Israel has then done is try to make a deal with the Indian state, with the Prime Minister Modi, to send Indian workers to Israel to replace the workers that are no longer working because of the genocide that Israel itself is committing, right? And Modi, our Prime Minister in India, agreed to this absolutely, and agreed that, already has promised so much support. However, every single major trade union, the 4 major trade unions of workers in India, voted against Modi's plans to send workers to Israel, and has been heavily activating against these plans, stopping this transaction to happen. I'm also thinking here of the dock workers unions in India that has actually refused to take shipments related to arms from Israel. They have shut down the ports. 11 ports have been shut down. And there has been a clear declaration that all these arms that are coming from central India and southern India, from Hyderabad in particular, going to Israel, will not go through these ports. So I'm thinking around, all of this happening. There are so many of my comrades in the queer grassroots movements in India. Despite police brutality and arrest, they have been continuing to take the streets in India. They have been continuing to make these connections. And here again, we have to think about what does this mean in terms of transnational solidarity, because all of these very material things are happening, and all of these things are going on, and yet the violence continues, and yet the genocide continues. So how do we as transnational feminists also figure out strategically, as well as from the perspective of actually realizing that this is not simply a space where we show up for a weekly protest or a weekly sit-in, as we have been doing in London as well. I'm based in London right now. But how do we intensify our protests? How do we occupy every single place? How do we interrupt every single normal functioning of an institution, normal functioning of the government, wherever we are, if we truly want to build transnational solidarity? And I sort of want to end by talking about what is happening in my institution. I work as an educator in a university in London, Southeast London. And our institution is supposedly one of the progressive, liberal, whatever institutions, which it clearly isn't. It loves to speak a language of social justice. It loves to speak a language of, how progressive they are. But like every single academic institution, it is completely rooted in coloniality. It supports violence across the world in so many ways. But our students have done something really remarkable, is that the university has been refusing to even say the word genocide in its public statements. It continues to use the word crisis. The universe, and also Middle East crisis, which is absolutely violent articulation of what is happening. And the university has also got lots of links to different companies that support the genocide, whether they are not direct links to arms companies because they have divested due to previous student campaigns, but there are many, many links to various companies that are definitely supporting the genocide in different ways. And the university has also adopted, like many institutions across the UK, the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is a definition that actually does not address any anti-Semitism on campus, and in fact likens anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism and criminalizes students who dare to speak up against Israel and against Zionism, particularly students who are Palestinian, who are Muslim, who are Arab. So students about today's, I'm trying to remember the dates, on the 20th of February, so a long time ago now, a few weeks ago, students decided to move into a building and occupy it until the university agrees to their demands. They started with the protest outside the main building of the university, and then they decided to conduct teach outs within this one building that they then decided, like they had already planned this, that when they go in, they're not going to leave. And it became a situation where the university locked all its gates to prevent the students and few of our staff members who were with them to enter the university, but they managed to find a way into the university and went in and occupied this building. And now it's been almost 1 month since the building has been occupied. They have 5 clear demands from the university, including giving funding for scholarships to Palestinian students. And of course, all the other things that I mentioned, divesting from anything related to Israel and the Israeli state, and revoking the IHRA definition, releasing a statement that without question thinks about the genocide and offers support to Palestinian students, as well as various other demands. And the students in this space have created an alternative university, really. It is an actual space of education and learning together. We've been having teach outs, we're having communal meals. There's a lot of discussions on how to escalate actions. People are going to protest together. So I just want to say that within all of these, horrific links that I have also spent many, many years studying, and many of us have encountered in different ways, where we can see how all of these very bloody, rotten, ruthless regimes of settler colonialism, of state authoritarianism, capitalist, neoliberal, fascist, liberal regimes that are connected and invested in creating a world of violence. There are many, many moments of everyday mobilization that transnational solidarity is building from. And I think the question for us is to really think about, how do we hold on to these? How do we deepen these? How do we understand that maybe some of our strategies are not working, and how do we change those strategies and have those conversations? And also, how do we think about this in a very longer term? Obviously, the immediate concern is a ceasefire, is the deliverance of aid, is the deliverance of stopping the genocide. But how do we actually make sure that we all come together to continue a struggle against settler colonialism, dispossession, capitalism in the long term, as feminists, as queers, as educators, as researchers and activists? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Akanksha. Just before moving to the next speaker, I, as a kind of act of also acknowledging, a feminist act of really remembering how we come together and the labors that go behind. Just because Akanksha mentioned that kind of bringing people together, and we all know that we're not going to come together unless we all actively decide to come together. And so I thank you, everyone who's here and is making this possible for us to be together. And there is obviously never just one person who does that, but really kind of mentioning the great work that goes over the year on kind of maintaining the Harris Watch platform that Golcher Qawami puts in there, and kind of we come here together and for 3 days every year and do the effort, but there is that work that kind of happens throughout the year. That's something very inspiring for me, and also other friends from Feminist for Jinak who helped to put this panel together. I should have mentioned this at the beginning. I will let you decide who would like to speak next. Elif?
Hi, everyone. I want to apologize for how late I was. I really got the times different. I've got a bit of a cold, so I'm a bit disoriented. So hopefully I make sense. I ask for your forgiveness from now. It's really amazing to be amongst so many amazing thinkers and doers and organizers and so on. And I think actually the kind of hope, especially that these kind of discussions invoke, is actually quite serious political, feelings and actions that particularly in these kind of environments that I think we appreciate, but perhaps need to be understood and appreciated in other environments as well. I think, it's and especially transnational feminism or feminist or women's alliances and so on, I think are perhaps one of the most crucial points of defense that our peoples have. And in the name of like internationalism as well, I want to remember Anna Campbell, who yesterday, it was the 6-year anniversary of her martyrdom. She fell as a result of a Turkish airstrike in Afrin in 2018, fighting actually as one of the most perhaps like practical and material demonstrations of internationalist solidarity. I want to also take this opportunity to remember all our peoples who are on the front lines of resistance, and I guess reiterate the kind of responsibility that particularly this time, of course every time, but particularly this time puts upon us. And I think, I want to reiterate something that the friend just before me said, in that touched upon, sometimes it's quite hard to talk about the doing and the thinking and so on when the gravity of the situation that's either sometimes we're responding to or thinking about feels so large or so mighty. And I think all of us understand that what's happening in Palestine right now is perhaps one of the biggest turning points of our time, and in a way for better or for worse. And what we're trying to do is for better. Obviously, things will not be the same again. And I think I'll get into I guess the different elements of that, and part of what our role and our responsibility I think is in organizing around that. But I want to talk a little bit about the kind of situation that the Kurdish women's movement finds itself in, and also some of the work being done. It's of course very difficult to talk about the Kurdish women's movement in a few minutes because it spans in the Middle East, at least 4 nation states, in the nation states that the Kurdish people are divided into, but also operates through kind of people's diplomacy in many other parts of the region as well. And I think one of the things that that movement has been saying for a long time is that the 21st century will be the century of women's liberation. But of course, what comes with that is the international nation state, patriarchal capitalist nation states systems, obviously reaction to that as well, of those struggles, obviously in Kurdistan, but also in many other parts of the region and the world too. And what we've seen particularly, and I think when we're talking about solidarity, when we're talking about internationalism, perhaps one of the things to understand in particular from a women's liberationist or feminist perspective is particularly the tactics and strategies of special warfare of the states that we are I guess organizing and doing work within. And one of the things that we've seen in Kurdistan, but actually it's not limited to Kurdistan. Again, we see this in so many parts of the world. And I say this to also demonstrate just how interconnected this system is, right? Of what we're fighting against. People have said this already in their previous talks, of just how many of the elements quite directly and materially are connected, but also, kind of politically, ideologically, and systemically as well. And one of the most crucial things that we've seen across the region is the targeting of women political leaders, and therefore the attempt to kind of assassinate women political leaders, and through that to co-opt the rest of the movements. And we've seen this, I think, definitely across Kurdistan. We've seen this in parts of course, Iran as well. We've seen this in so many other parts of the region. Actually, in some ways, the state understands like just the role that women's movements and you know, the leading of women's liberation perspective can play. And sometimes I think we almost don't understand like the impact of the kind of work we can do. We don't understand it enough sometimes, I feel like. So one of the things we've seen is of course like targeting of women leaders and co-opting rest of the movements, and we've seen this also of course through various other tactics and strategies in the West as well. We've seen the attempt to, you know, co-opt, for example, the Xinjiang Azadi slogan, you know, women like the foreign minister of Germany kind of saying Xinjiang Azadi, but obviously being complicit, not only complicit, but defending genocide a few months later. You know, these are all actually, you know, it's not a surprise. It's also not an accident. It's not a contradiction from the perspective of the people doing this, right? It's actually completely in line with the attempt to co-opt radical elements of a movement, try and integrate it into the capitalist system to be able to justify atrocities in many parts of the world. And of course, you know, what all of our attention is at right now is of course the horrific genocide being carried out in Gaza. So when we talk about all of this, I think it's also very important that we talk about the kind of battlegrounds of struggle. Obviously, many of it is on the front line in our like homelands, but also a very important front line of that being the dungeons or the prisons of the states that imprison our people, particularly in Kurdistan. But I know it's obviously absolutely not limited to Kurdistan. You know, or the Kurdish people. Women are particularly targeted and make up actually quite a significant percentage of political prisoners, particularly in Turkey, within the Turkish state. And part of this obviously is because of like the mobilization of women, but part of it is also that actually the state understands that as a strategy to break, you know, certain revolutionary elements of the movements as well, and actually understands the principles in which you know, many of our movements operate within, which is actually the freedom of society will be led by women's liberation. I think, you know, we also understand just how interconnected these states are, and I think it's very important for me to talk about, you know, some of the ways in which some of the leaders of these states obviously try and use our struggles for their you know, to cover their own atrocities as well. We obviously it's you know, we hear Netanyahu talk about like what the Kurds go through, or we hear Erdogan talk about, you know, the Palestinians, and actually you don't even need to dig that much deeper. You just scratch the surface a little bit and see just how connected and just how strong their economic and other ties are, right? And for me, I don't know why, and maybe it's a good thing that I'm still kind of shocked and startled by this, but since October 7th, trade between Israel and Turkey has actually gone up even more. Not that it stayed the same, it was already quite a significant level of trade actually, but it's gone up even more. And for me, one of the most alarming things is that, you know, some of the suggestions by the Turkish state and Erdogan to build certain settlements for Palestinians in places like, you know, the north of Cyprus, in certain parts of Syria that the Turkish army or Turkish-supported jihadists occupy. And I think the reason why this is important, not just because obviously this is you know, land that the Turkish state occupies, but also because this is literally doing the Israeli state's work for it, is taking Palestinians out of Palestine. So I think this is one of the things that I think is quite important. And one of the things I just wanted to end on is, you know, the question of how do we continue to build capacity while constantly responding to like situations of crisis, which seems like won't be going away for a while, right? I don't know the answer to this question, but I think, or I don't know the full answer, or like I don't actually think there is a one prescriptive answer. But I think this probably should be one of our central questions in how we continue to build capacity while responding to all the things that obviously will be coming up. And I think the reason why that is important is because it's important that as much as we can, we try and shift from a place of, defending, what we want to defend, resisting, to obviously building as well, building our alternatives, building the kind of world we want to see in the here and now. And sometimes that feels, almost like a distraction when, what is going on feels so grave. But actually, I think this is a very crucial, particularly long-term line of defense in terms of trying to build systems that perhaps are the actual, more systemic forms of self-defense that we need to see. And I think, for many of us on this call, next week is Nowruz, the start of spring and our new year. And I think, for many of us who do celebrate Nowruz, it's also an opportunity for new beginnings and for, in a way, new stages of struggle. So I want to, I guess I want to end on the reflection that, even though there's obviously a lot of darkness and a lot of atrocities happening, I think we should perhaps we can take this opportunity to also think about what that newness can bring for us. And one of the an Irish comrade that we work with quite a lot recently posed the question, which I've been saying in so many spaces since I heard it from her, which is, if this moment could speak to us, what do you think it would ask of us? And I'll end there.
Thank you so much. We'll come back to this question for sure. Elisa or Maya? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. I am very excited to be here with the woman from the Global South. I come from Latin America, and our past was very similar to what we now experience in the Middle East. In the 17th, the Global North waged war against our country, and we are still living the consequence. For this reason, from Latin America, we feel very connected with the woman from other parts of the Global South. Sorry for my English. I will try to be clear. Okay, my name is Elisa. I speak person from the Coordinadora Feminista 8M from Chile. I will talk about feminist movement in Chile. It's not new. It's arose at the beginning of the 20th century with the woman organized in the mines in the north of Chile, who fought for better working conditions for mines workers. In the revolutionary government of popular unity in the 17th, women were active in left-wing parties and become actively involved in the social struggle. Later, we suffered a very terrible dictatorship in the 17 years. The women were the first to take the street to denounce the repression and the human rights violations. In the 19th, the neoliberal system imposed by the dictatorship we depicted. In Chile now, everything was privacies and social rights such health, housing, education were eliminated. And this is very terrible consequence for the woman. For example, due to the lack of housing, the domestic violence against us increased. Or other example, the health system discriminates against us and charge us more than men. Or in our school, we suffer abuse and sexual harassment. Given this context, in the 2018, the student movement began to denounce harassment in the school and the university space. This provoked a wave of large protests across the country. In this context, a group of women and militants of the anti-capitalist left organized and create a coordinator to transversalize the feminists to all the social movement. And the other proposed was change the character of Age of March and did a feminist general strike. We politicized the Age of March using the most important instrument for workers' movement, the strike. No? The strike was also characterized as anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, ecology, and internationalist. Since then, the Chilean feminist and the Latin American movement has been of the most radical and massive political movement in our continent. The Coordinadora Feminista 8M work in different thematics. For example, health, housing, education, human rights, and internationals. Internationalism has been one of our fundamental pillars. We consider that one of the strengths of the feminist movement, which has historically questioned the limit of the body and the territory, its transnational character. Specifically, we claim a transnational internationalist that question burden and connect struggle, specifically anti-colonial struggle and global south. Our struggle arises from the need to connect with those who also suffer the consequence of the global capitalist, patriarchal, and colonialist crisis, in order to jointly confront the global authoritarian against our body and territory. But our internationality is not classical. We don't conceive of the nation as immobile entity located in national state, but rather we recognize people in terms of their territory and a struggle of their territory. Likewise, we have our experience in terms of common results with the struggle from women and people in different territories. The common resistance against capital, patriarchy, and colonialism. But we recognize that our struggles are also different, because each place of resistance has its particularity. Our power lies in seeing the common and the different in the same time. Our struggle have been concreted. We support the women of Brazil against Bolsonaro, or our Argentina comrade in the struggle for abortion, and now from the Milei, the president fascist present, and now we support the Palestinian women who are suffering a terrible consequence of genocide. Chile has the largest Palestinian population of South Arab world. We have many Palestinian population in Chile. The feminist movement was the first to mobilize to Palestinian people in Chile. And we have received many attacks. For example, they tell us we don't defend all the women, such Israeli women. But we say that our movement in Latin America is the most important movement. So we have the responsibility to show the solidarity with the struggle of the oppressed. We are women from the global south, so we have suffered the colonialism and imperialism too. Therefore, we have the duty to take a stand for the colonialist people. And we organize with the feminists from all Latin America. We organize with the other feminists over Latin America for 3 reasons. Because our colonized character, no? We are from the global south. So we have the duty to stand from the colonized people. And 2, Israel is also involved in our violence in our country. For example, they sell weapons at our state. And 2, they have a company in our country that destroy our environment. And 3, to happen in Gaza can happen in the future in our territory too. So we fight for the future of the world. In addition, our international is deeply connected to our anti-racist struggle without in own territory. We fight alongside with migrants who suffer the consequences of national racism on daily basis. We internationalists is very connected with the migrant movement. For us, it's very obviously why the North Global or country like German, France support Israel, because they do the same with the migrants. It's connected. So our internationality denounce the racism too. Finally, from feminists, we have erased the borders imposed in our body and in our territory. Because we live in the power of territory and we fight against the borders that limit us. We have the transnational force. So we know this is the very important thing to fight against to the capital and colonial and patriarchal system. So this, thank you, and sorry for my English. I try to be better in the other time.
Thank you so much. No, that was really amazing, and everything made a lot of sense. And yeah, it's amazing to kind of remind ourselves it just reminded me of a sentence of like, if they come, I think it's Angela Davis, if they come for me in the morning, they will come for you at the night. And you kind of really capturing that of knowing that it will come, it will get closer. It was close, the violence was close, and it will come to us again. And that's what we need to like show solidarity with, because we know it's also affecting us, rather than having an empathy on that. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll have Maya. Thank you, Maya.
Thanks, everyone. It's always very challenging to come at last and after so many inspiring interventions. But yeah, from where I stand, I think there are nuances that I'd like to highlight and bring into the mix of the very rich discussions and ideas that you all shared. I don't know if you know, but I assume you do. I am from Lebanon, and my family and my parents, my grandparents, they're originally from the south of Lebanon. They also had roots in Palestine, because there was a time that wasn't so long ago where borders didn't really matter. And it was so hard for us to, I think it is so hard for us now to imagine such a world. Like, even though there were already a lot of colonial plans, the Sykes-Picot, the partition plan of the Levant and in the Middle East area, it was very easy for my family to just go to Haifa, for my grandmother to give birth there, to work there. The Southerners were the actual, were actually the impoverished communities, and opportunities were found mostly in Palestine at the time. So this is to say that the question of identities wasn't that complicated for the generation that was like right before mine or my father's. And currently we're in Lebanon, we're still at war in Israel. In Lebanon, it's not very difficult to stand against Israel, because by law, Israel is the enemy. So you won't be silenced because you're anti-Israel and anti-Zionism. We've witnessed the consequences of this colonial project and the ambitious expansionist policies and projects of Israel, which is right by our southern borders. And Lebanon is at war right now. But when you see what's going on in Gaza, even us here in Lebanon, we're like sort of embarrassed to talk about what is happening here. And that's not, that's not very right. I don't like how the oppressive regimes make us feel guilty all the time of not finding our own grievances and pains legitimate enough, or maybe dramatic enough to be mentioned. But that's the case. If we're always comparing to what's worse, Israel keeps surprising you, and then you silence yourself somehow because you're seeing how horrible it is a few kilometers away from our borders. But Lebanon is at war, especially the south, and we're in that state where we're anticipating a worse scenario, a harder scenario. So, I mean, you wake up one day, you don't know if, okay, is it like going to escalate today or not? Are they going to hit Beirut? Are they going to, break the military engagement rules? Now, you have these terminologies in the news. So it is difficult, the uncertainty and, the daily threats we keep hearing from Israeli politicians and from the Zionists, that they're going to make Lebanon another Gaza if Hezbollah does not withdraw to, the north side of the river. So basically creating some sort of buffer zone. Put that aside, there's another layer that we need to be aware of. And I'll take you back a few weeks before Israel launched its genocidal military campaign against Palestine. In Lebanon, we're going through the third the so-called third most serious economic crisis that the world has witnessed in the last century. And with that comes also a backlash, and a backlash that has its specificities, I think, depending on our context. But in Lebanon, we were witnessing an unprecedented backlash amidst an economic crisis. I think it's a bit similar to what was going on in Iran in the last few decades. And you know, for the first time, the oppression, the attacks against feminists, against queer-friendly bars were happening in the capital, which was not the case before. You know, these incidents would happen in other rural areas, more conservative areas, but the fact that they hit the capital felt different. That's, you know, it's not a new story, sadly. But it was the case. There were attacks on billboards that had rainbows, on board games that had rainbows, you know, the snake and the labyrinth. Wherever they saw a rainbow, they would like just go in and try to rip it apart. Like, you know, if they could reach the sky, they would have like attacked the actual rainbow. I don't know. And there were these formation of rogue groups of non-state actors. I'm sure you know this story also in your context, but the guys in your neighborhoods who are trying to replace the state somehow to preserve the security of the neighborhood, but then they're emboldened, they're entitled to do more than that, obviously, and they're very sexist, etc. So these morality police were not the state-sanctioned police, were not the state-sponsored police. We had like the formation of different morality police groups during these months before the war on Gaza. And one of the most serious events within that context, besides the attacks by these groups on women and LGBTQ and queer individuals, was the call by the head of the most powerful party in Lebanon, which is Hezbollah, to actually kill any LGBT individual that, you know, his follower see or his constituency sees or catches. And, you know, from the first time, just like not even take him to conversion therapy, or not even, you know, reject him, isolate him, kill him. Now we go back to October 8th. That same group heading these calls to killings and hatred, inciting violence against us, our activism, our people, ordinary people, anyone, is actually leading the resistance in the South. And his men are the resistance fighters, who, by the way, can be our classmates. They can be our friends. They can be, you know, people that you meet in the streets and have a shisha with. So it's very complicated. It's not easy. And Israel, of course, will never make it easy, because you want them to stop Israel. You want someone to stop Israel. You want someone to achieve something or prevent Israel from advancing. But at the same time, as feminists, we shouldn't be silenced. We shouldn't be intimidated. We shouldn't be told over and over again, okay, but you have no right to criticize Hezbollah. You have no right to criticize whomever, just because, you know, right now they're leading that fight. I stopped for a moment myself, and I really, you know, thought about it, and I wanted to reflect about it, because it's so difficult also for people like me who come from the South. But I realized that we cannot shy away from these conversations, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to talk about the resistance in all its forms, which we all welcome, because this is our right, or the resistance in Palestine, living under the occupation since 75 years. And it's a different situation from Lebanon. But now these groups leading the resistance, the military resistance, if I want to make that specific nuance, I'm not sure they really care about Palestine itself. I don't think they really care about Palestine itself. They care about their own ideological expansion. They care about their own show of force. They have allegiance to regional powers that also have their imperialist agendas. They are proxies to a regime which we know hate its own people, hate its own women. the Houthis are now viewed as heroes because they're stopping shipments in the Red Sea that are going to Israel. I mean, great tactic. Wow. Okay, but you cannot be pro-liberation of Palestine and other people and be against the liberation of your own people. So I can't buy this argument anymore myself. So this is where I feel like this sort of transnational solidarity is very important, because I don't want to be in a space where I cannot voice out this opinion and be treated as a traitor, right? Like, because, I don't know, you're sort of compromising, now is not the time or whatever. Because I think this was the mistake of previous generations, and I would like to try and challenge that and be able to be pro-Palestine and with Palestinian people, with people from the south, with the Yemeni people, with Iraqi people, with Syrian people who, I mean, that dictatorship is another form of occupation, to be honest, in Syria. Like, I cannot give a pass and credit this axis just in the name of Palestine, because they've been hijacking the Palestinian cause for decades. And so I think it's very important for our sisters in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Iran, to be careful when we talk about our right to resist and not to be silenced, because I feel this huge machine that has its agenda is not a liberation agenda, and it does not really connect or intersect with the liberation agendas and the emancipation desire that we all have. So this like transnational solidarity that we're trying to build, I think, needs to be aware of all of these differences and our experiences and how they are shaped. How a few months before Gaza, I mean, yeah, even Hassan Nasrallah encouraging child marriage, the production cycle of young wives and childbearing that will become assets in his machine. I'm not going to forget that side of that group, just because they're on the front lines. So it's very important for these spaces to acknowledge these, I think, to have a space to discuss these things, and yes, invest more in how we resist and how we support those who are resisting in blood and flesh, also inside Palestine. How we support, feminists around the world, the Black Lives Matter movement, how we interconnect with them, the university students, the port workers that were forbidding shipments from loading. I think there's a lot of relationships to restore, a lot of areas to explore in terms of transnational solidarity, even like beyond our immediate women's movement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. Yeah, I think that was particularly very kind of understandable for most of the audience of this panel, because with the way of also the Palestine issue is hijacked by the Islamic Republic politics and the kind of complexities that we have when we're, around differentiating these two from each other, and just not paying attention to these false like dichotomies that if pro-Palestine is to be like just because we're still standing against the Islamic Republic, then we can't have a shared kind of front of resistance. And the point is what you absolutely mentioned. They don't care about Palestine or Palestinians. That is not their fight. Palestine is not Islamic Republic's fight. It is about more power. It's about resources and all of that. I think just as kind of an active accessibility, we've been here for over an hour. We would like to have a Q&A, but what if we come back at in 4 minutes? So just for anyone who wants to get a glass of water, just stretch and come back. So we'll come at 3 London time for EU, so 4 minutes. See you. For those of you who are still in the meeting and can hear me, in the next hour will be a bit of a discussion in response to everything we've heard and on the topic of transnational solidarity and alliances in general, thinking about how can we translate discourses like beyond language. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask, the chat is open now. You can type them there or in the Q&A section. We also welcome you to raise your hand if you want to contribute anything speaking. And if you want to ask a question but you prefer to do it in Farsi, I assume you need you can do that. If you, I'm sure that there needed to be some level of understanding to get the conversation, but we know that talking or writing sometimes is more difficult. So you are more than welcome to ask your questions in Farsi as well. Thank you, Mahbouba. We'll start in a bit. Okay. I guess once I have Elif, Akanksha, and Maya back, I would just make maybe dedicate some moments. Like, I don't know if anyone has kind of some direct response to or kind of comments on the other speakers' talks, anything that has stood out before we allow the people in the audience to speak. So does anyone kind of want to go first, or should we start with what's in the chat? Okay. So we had Mahbouba. Okay, Mahbouba Jan, you should be able to unmute now.
سلام به همگی. من امکانش هست که فارسی صحبت کنم؟
بله بله حتما.
دست شما در نکنه. خیلی ممنون از این جلسه‌ای که برگزار شد و واقعا من لذت بردم. دست شما در نکنه. یکی از سوالایی که حالا برای من ایجاد شد این بود که این همبستگی فراملی که توی صحبت‌های همه گفته شد و این پنل هم سعی داشت این رو تقویت کنه، می‌خواستم ببینم الان در حال حاضر چقدر همچین همبستگی وجود داره، چون من حالا خیلی در این زمینه مطالعات تحقیقی نداشتم. یعنی فکر می‌کردم که مثلا همچین جلساتی رو خب من خیلی کم می‌بینم که برگزار بشه و این برگزار کننده به عنوان یک فمینیست وضعیت همبستگی فعلی رو چجوری ارزیابی میکنن و چجوری میشه این تقویت بشه و گونه‌های مختلف فمینیست توی کشورهای مختلف، شیوه‌های مختلفی از مقاومت که وجود داره، همونطور که مایا فکر کنم روی این تاکید کردن، این رو میشه به اشتراک گذاشت، تقویت بشه، مورد بحث نقد قرار بگیره. من تصورم اینه که شاید همچین چیزی انقدر هم وجود نداشته باشه، مثلا تصورم اشتباه باشه. یکی این نکته رو می‌خواستم بگم، یکی هم نکته‌ای گفت نفر اول فیدا جان در مورد این گفتن که گفتن من I hate که توی اخبار فقط روی این مسئله زنان و کودکان تاکید میکنن و مثلا در مورد مردان چیزی نمیگن، در مورد کشته شده ها حالا کمتر ممکن تاکید بشه. حالا خودم یه سری چیزایی رو خوندم ولی دوست داشتم از زبون خودشون بشنوم که از چه جهت این موضوع براشون مهم بود. دست شما در نکنه. متشکرم.
Merci. So, yeah, Mahbuba was saying that how, what would you kind of evaluate as the state in which the transnational solidarity right now happens? And obviously she also kind of spoke from the point in which that these kind of conversation within the Iranian kind of Farsi speaking probably feminist organization are not as common. We don't have these kind of conversations. And how for your struggles, how do you evaluate kind of the level of existing transnational solidarity, and how can we kind of do this more of the translating each other's struggles? They mentioned like how Maya was saying about learning from each other's struggles, and so how can we kind of do that more? And also, I don't know if we should, maybe if anyone wants to kind of go respond. And then there was a question directly for Fida. They wanted to know that when you mentioned that it's quite like, they quoted you of like hating to hear that we only talk about women and children, and we need to obviously speak about like men and elders as well. But if you could elaborate on that, of what, like, kind of what does that creates, what kind of narrative that creates, I guess.
Yeah. When I mentioned the only women perspective, I mean, we see a lot of reports that, okay, 30,000 were murdered, and even more, because the statistics that we see are not really accurate, since they destroyed Al-Shifa hospital, which is the main hub where all the information comes from, the 36 hospitals in Gaza, where only 4 are partially functioning now. But anyway, when they mention always that 8,000 women and 13,000 kids were killed. And I know, like, when it comes from people, let's say allies between quotation marks, they mean it in a good intention. But the emphasis on that women and children were killed, it does make men automatically a target, a legitimate target. And this is how I see it. When I see women and children were killed, it says it's not okay to kill these categories. They categorize us. They see us as numbers or a group, not humans. But it's fine if the rest are men. And they want to make and like divide us, civilians and non-civilians, in their terms, when they say men and children, but not when they say women and children. This is what I meant, and we should not use that narrative, because, as I said, our men want to live, and if the Palestinian men in Gaza are fighting, they are fighting for a reason, and women are fighting for a reason. And we see actually that the Israeli killing machine does not differentiate between the two. If we say anyone who identifies as a woman or anyone who identifies as a man, so they themselves do not differentiate. They do not care if someone is carrying arms or not, civilian or not, women or queer, cis or gay. They do not differentiate. Why should we put emphasis that does make men, our siblings, our brothers, our people who are resisting, a legitimate target? We should reject this narrative. Regarding the transnational solidarity, the point, I find that something is building up. Maybe other comrades and panelists are more optimistic because it's like happening in my head because I have family there. I think in the moment why it's not stopping. Whatever we are doing, it's not enough. So I have a different kind of feeling, frustration that this is not enough. It should stop. It means we should escalate the struggle. What are we doing wrong? And actually, those questions are good. We should ask ourselves why we couldn't, we haven't managed till now to stop what's happening in Gaza. Are we using the wrong tools? Are protests working? Maybe we should like disrupt the economy. Maybe that point exactly is the right thing. Our focus should be there because we see why they are hitting Yemen. Yemen did not launch rockets. Yemen did block the Red Sea. Yeah, the empire was upset, and it's not lives. It's economy at risk for them. So, but I want to mention one example, and I try to see hope that we are doing something together. Transnational resistance, emancipation. And in Germany here, I arrived a few years ago. I've never seen organizing inside universities. It's a very weird society, I would say. It's like, it's hard to explain what's happening there. Like everyone asks me, what's wrong with Germany? And I say, everything is wrong with Germany. But since October, in multiple universities, very young generation, among them a lot of internationals, groups of students are grouping, organizing, and this is new. To have such young spirits are trying to challenge the system, a system where politicians from the right to the left are right-wing. It is very inspiring, and yeah, so there is hope, and I hope we can build in that and discuss what kind of tools should we use to work towards abolishing all systems of oppressions that are oppressing us. One last point I wanted to mention, it's the point that Maya mentioned, we should not silence ourselves. Like the Palestinian women do fight different battles. We do fight patriarchy, we do find regressive, oppressive structures within our society, but we do also fight for our liberation and emancipation. And as Elisa mentioned, it's about, we fight against the borders that limit us. We fight for self-determination, but also we fight for the liberation of women. And it goes hand in hand together. And one does advance the other. And that's why did the Israeli state also target women rights activists, feminists, because they know if they advance, it's gonna put the Israeli state also in danger. If we manage to emancipate ourselves, actually liberate ourselves, it's going to put them in danger. So they feed on that. They want to sustain that system that we are oppressed, and they feed it in kind of a way. Yeah. I don't know what are other points. Oppressive regimes not only how we should be strong in the same way that they not only exchange arm deals, they do exchange oppressive tools, information, tactics. We saw what happened in Ferguson and in other places. I mean, the German police here is trained by the Israeli police. So it's not only about arm deals. They do exchange oppressive tools. They are very connected. They are. It is a genocidal system, a capitalist, neoliberal, fascist dictatorship that does manifest itself differently in different territories, in different states, in different countries. And we're going to bring it down.
Thank you, Fidaa. Yeah, just thought that we should allow for a moment. There is a comment in the chat from Rupsa. Says, what stood out was the idea of supporting people and not governments as the crux of any transnational solidarity, to abandon the logics of law and police. Hezbollah's critique reminded me of the issue many raised about the glorification of the South African nation state in the context of the ICJ case. While the case presented was crucial and kudos to the lawyers, it becomes important to not glorify international laws and governments, considering how South African government is complicit in the Sudanese genocide. Yeah, I think that's what kind of it comes up, that it's just so integrated. And yeah, I guess I read the other comment as well, and then I allow anyone who would like to respond to just things in general. Thank you for the panel from Carolina. And I was wondering if there are any international meetings where we can gather together and share experiences and struggle. In Latin America, since 1981, we have had a Latin American and Caribbean feminist encounters. Is there something similar at a transnational level? Yeah. And should I read, Sabiha, do you want me to read your, the response to Ripsa from Sabiha was 100%. This is also reminds me of Elif's intervention a while ago regarding Turkey. It looks like every nation state has its ways of weaponizing Palestinians and the marginalized in general. So yeah, I'll allow you, some people speak, maybe Elisa, you have your hand up.
Bueno, I will talk in Spanish now, and I think can translate, please. Hello.
Yeah.
So I want to respond one question of Mehta.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, thank you so much for pointing that out. I actually was going to ask that question. Mehtab's question about how did they see the solidarity in their home countries during the Janjan Azadi movement in Iran in 2022?
Yeah. Para nosotras fue muy importante la solidaridad con las mujeres en Irán.
For us, it's our solidarity with women in Iran is very important.
Porque en Latinoamérica tenemos un contexto que cada vez que, por ejemplo, Irán, Rusia o cualquier otro país que esté en contra de Estados Unidos,
because in Latin America, every time there's a country that is constructed or opposed to the US, for example, Iran and Russia,
inmediatamente la izquierda en Chile apoya a esos gobiernos, porque en el fondo piensa que es un apoyo en contra de Estados Unidos y por lo tanto nos hacen ver el mundo de manera muy en dos, ¿no? Como Estados Unidos, Rusia, Irán, etc.
So every time, basically what immediately follows is that the left immediately supports, these countries to the extent that the only vision that is afforded to the Chilean is the US and anti-US.
Entonces, cuando las mujeres feministas apoyamos al pueblo y a las mujeres de Irán, se nos atacó de ser pro Estados Unidos.
And the paradox for the activist feminists in Chile is that whenever they support these women in Iran, they are accused of being a supporter of the Iranian regime.
Entonces, ¿por qué digo que fue importante? Porque nosotras entendimos que era necesario que empecemos desde el movimiento feminista y el movimiento feminista a nivel internacional a generar una tercera fuerza, una fuerza que no esté en este juego de o estás pro Estados Unidos o pro Irán o pro Rusia, sino que una tercera fuerza que sea realmente antiimperialista, ¿no? Anticapitalista. Y para eso la lucha de las mujeres de Irán nos abrió como esa posibilidad.
And this is why feminists in Chile consider that from the start, we should focus on an activism that has a vision for an alternative way of being beyond the imperial, anti-imperial poles. And this is why, the one that is anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist. Yeah.
Y por lo tanto, como esa fuerza de las mujeres de Irán nos mostró esa posibilidad. Y sobre todo para Latinoamérica, que estamos muy todavía atrapados en esta idea de como la Guerra Fría.
And the events in Iran opened our eyes, referring to Chile feminist movement. It opened their eyes to the possibility of imagining something beyond the moment now, where they feel they are trapped in dynamics that are similar to the Cold War.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It seems the binaries, dichotomies haunt us all the time, everywhere. Elif and Akanksha had their hands up at different times before, and I know they're not up anymore, but either anyone wants to respond to any of the questions that were mentioned, or just anything.
I can say a couple of things. On the question of, the women and children focus, I think because one of the ways in which these projects are working is by dehumanizing men and criminalizing, pathologizing men, whether, we're talking about in the context of the Hindu right wing in India, the kind of dehumanization of Muslim men. And then, of course, we see the dehumanization and criminalizing of men from Gaza. So I think it's really important to do away with the women and children framing that just decides that only some people are worth living and others are not, because it's also the relationship between the more we use the women and children framing, the more that dehumanization of men becomes normalized. So I think, and there is a long history to this, because in a lot of studies of politics and international relations, as well as like all of these like policy circles and political spaces, there's so much emphasis on this women and children framing constantly. It also infantilizes women and children. It also takes away from the agency of resistance, of different forms of survival. So I just wanted to say that. And with regards to Rupsa's comment, I just wanted to say, I think absolutely. I mean, we already knew that the logics of the state, law and police were not logics that, we should be supporting, and the state was never our friend and the law and police were never our friends. But I think what the ongoing genocide in Gaza has shown, that even any kind of performative sham of a belief in those systems is not possible at all. And I really want to say that point about South African nation state, ICJ, and the Sudanese genocide is really important, and something that is not being discussed enough. So I'm really thankful that you brought that up as well.
Thank you. Sabiha?
Just to add immediately to what Akanksha said, also when we insist, right, if we think about the very long term of conflict, post-conflict, inevitably forced displacement, migration, right? And then what happens, right, when we already see it in the UK, the utter demonization of any male refugees, right, as if men bodies cannot be refugees, cannot ask for asylum, etc., etc. So yeah, just wanted to add, because thank you.
So why we can wait? Nilüfer, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this panel. I just want to make this note that this is so rare to have such conversation for Iranian audience. And my question is to all. And this is a question that I have like literally no answer to. And I know it's a very difficult question, but for me, it really means a lot to know your reflection on. And the question is about the radicalities that are kind of washed away in translation of our fights and resistance from home to diaspora. So just to let you know, I'm like 2 years outside of Iran, and I've been always shocked to see the harsh difference between what's happening back home and how the fights, struggles, and movements are represented outside, even in the very radical, left radical organizations, activists, etc., for so many reasons. And when Maya was talking, I know Maya's conversation is touching our hearts very deep, because that kind of critique is what we have back home, and also individually, but also last year, and also still now, it's always erased from two forces. One is the left, like the major left, who is always suspicious to any kind of resistance happening in Iran, and the other is very powerful. I call it fascist, but like some people call it nationalist, fascist Iranians outside who are also, so like we have these two powerful that they always either undermine resistance happening in Iran, or they kind of ignore it. So I wonder what can be done for these radicalities that are lost, because whatever we try to tell you to come to this arena of queer, feminist, transnational solidarity, we are also showing a copy of copy. So I'm just like wondering what are the possibilities, or if you also have such problem in your context. Thank you.
I guess that was a question to everyone, but also Maya. While you maybe, yeah, Elif?
I mean, I think this is such an important question, and I think I would obviously kind of, in a way, like it encompasses a lot, and I think the question could even have like gone further, right, in terms of trying to understand, particularly I think it's also related to some of the obstacles that we see in like of like a more material, more meaningful, like, you know, transnational internationalism and so on. Like, so I think it's in a way like related to the previous question around like, you know, kind of evaluating the state. I mean, the state of the question was specifically about transnational feminism, but internationalism as a whole as well. I think there's various things here, and I think, you know, there's going back to some of the things I said about like special warfare, which is a very broad approach of the states, which includes obviously like various like, you know, propaganda tools like the media and so on and so forth, and also very strongly, and we haven't spoken about this on the call yet, obviously, as the tools of criminalization. Well, like we've touched on it, but like not in detail, right? And I think a lot of the kind of compromised radicality, let's call it, or kind of revolutionary spirit culture and like forms of relating to each other. I think part of it is like relating to the material conditions in which people find themselves in the diaspora. That's not an excuse, obviously, because you know, a part of our responsibility is to organize around our material realities, which includes criminalization, for example. I think, you know, also just how much the left or like revolutionary organizing has been weakened over like particularly the 21st century. And again, that is related to like, you know, to various like elements of like criminalization, infiltration, and so on and so forth, and also like aggressive neoliberalism, right, which has like, you know, hacked away at society and therefore our like understanding of like collectiveness, and so that's all intertwined. The other thing, though, actually, I think is very, very important is, like, we don't necessarily speak about it very often, but I think this is the kind of space that it's important to raise, is actually like you know, particularly from certain sections of we say the broad left, let's say, for the sake of argument. I mean, we could hone in a bit more, but like the broad left, certain sections of it, I actually think there's quite like a, particularly when it comes to like the Middle East, there is actually quite an intense like Orientalist approach, which we've seen especially in the last like 5 months as well, like not almost but only believing that the most fundamentalist reactionary forces and organizations can be authentic to our region, and actually any other kind of I guess movement or efforts or organizing, somehow it must be being orchestrated particularly by like Western imperialism. Now, it's not to say that obviously Western imperialism isn't constantly orchestrating or attempting to orchestrate things all across the world, and which obviously includes the Middle East, but it's a very specific like way that people assume that like only the most like reactionary fundamentalist and, you know, in the case of the Middle East, Islamist organizations are authentic. Like obviously this is what the people are going to be, again, not understanding how, you know, the fact that Islamism unfortunately has come to dominate in our region is like a Western colonial kind of, what do you call it, like Western colonial project as well. Like when you look at, for example, last summer I was reading some like anthropological accounts of certain like particularly like, you know, cultural and like Islamic festivals from like the 12th, 13th century, actually like in certain parts of the Levant, and you see just how different like faith and religion and culture, like how different a space it holds. And there was always like some of these like, you know, Islamist and fundamentalist sections, but they were very marginal, right? The 20th century is what like the 20th century, through obviously like the nation state project in the Middle East, and therefore like, you know, of like colonialists and Western imperialists like pumping of funds to certain like organizations and tendencies, created the environment that these organizations came to dominate. So I think part of it is also like it's all connected to that as well, in like the compromise radicality outside of the home as well. And I think part of it is also actually defeatism as well, like not believing that it's actually really possible. So yeah, I guess part of our work is to also to talk about and to encourage the ideas of possibility as well, and but possibilities in a serious political way, like not just the dreaming. Of course, I mean, I believe in dreaming, but like, you know, actually like treating this as serious political work as well, like imagining, dreaming, like talking about possibilities and thinking about actually how these like come into action. So yeah, I guess like through a few threads there, but I hope that made sense.
Thank you so much. I feel like maybe other panelists wants to kind of respond to what you just said, and there are some answers. There's also a question in chat which you kind of in a way responded to, but I read it before anyone else wants to respond to Elif, and also Suzanne, which is asking about like kind of generally your takes on Islamism, and how do you frame Islamism at the current moment? Is it merely a cultural, local question, or an absolute product of Western imperialism? While in the West, we mainly hear about it from right-wing groups as a justification for systemic racism, and in the international left seems unable to frame it as anything other than a reaction to the far right. Is it enough for now, or is there a necessity for reinterpreting Islamism from a transnational, anti-capitalist, feminist point of view? Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to respond. I guess there's also like this. Yeah, I also want to add of like the complexities of even talking about Islamism, because bringing into the question the varieties, the multiplicity of Islams that we have, and and that can like be really complicated. But yeah, Elif, do you wanna? You said.
I mean, I didn't see that question when I said that, so I'll make a very short addition now, having read the question. I mean, I don't think I necessarily need to say this, but I'll say this just to start. Like, obviously, there's Islam as a faith, and then there's Islamism, right? And like Islam as a faith, and like the spirituality of it, and so on, obviously, is a very important part of like the lives of many people in across the world. But if we're going to talk about the Middle East as well. I mean, one of the things that like Islamism, when I talk about Islamism, often I'm talking about like political Islam as a whole, but obviously like other forms of like Islamist power or like structures of governance, and especially like political Islam, but not limited to. When you look at our region and what it's done to the Middle East, at least, it's the most friendly form of Islam to the internationalist capitalist order. Like political Islam is neoliberalism. Like when we look at like 20 years of like Erdogan rule in Turkey, like Erdogan's political Islamist approach has neoliberalized Turkey in an unbelievably aggressive way. So like I think it's also important to understand actually it's kind of like it's the mask of like neoliberal capitalism in our region as well. And actually it's been built up to it for like a whole century. So that was just my short addition.
Yeah, absolutely. Mehta, I don't want, there is a comment before Mehta, but you can, like, you go, is from someone who have kind of mentioned, you know, I hear the grief in the comment or the anger of like the possibility of speaking freely. So Zana Azad is saying, when you talk about all of this, I was thinking, at least you can speak freely. Our feminist activists are in prison, like Sarvinaz Ahmadi in Iran and Afghanistan. Our fight is over basic things like our rights to choosing clothes, finding work, and education. And I just really wanted to highlight this comment I feel like it's a very good embodiment of also the sense of isolation that our comrades have. I obviously know that all of you know, what it feels like for your comrades to be in prison. I know Elif already mentioned, like we, this week, I know Elisa, we know that going into prisons and not like in Chile and Turkey and our friends being on the other sides of the wall are something is familiar for us, but it's really like speaks about the isolation that people feel in Iran, and I just thought that we should mention it, and if anyone wants to kind of talk about it, but maybe we'll have Mehta speak first. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I had to I'm gonna, there was a microphone open. So if you're not speaking, if you can make sure it is muted so it doesn't have sound, but Mahtab Jan, you can speak now. Sorry.
Merci, Golcher. I hope you can hear me well. Just really quickly, a comment. First, thank you very much for mentioning. We cannot mention every single comrade's name that is in prison, either in Iran or struggling in Afghanistan, but it is really, really nice to, important to our struggle to remember every single name. Just wanted to quickly add to what Elif and Suzanne mentioned, that maybe in our struggle there is, or maybe the way knowledge is produced is that something like Islam is very much understood in the context of, in the internal context of a society rather than the international sphere. And I think the international relations part of the story is very much determining in what is happening in Turkey, how Islam is acting in Turkey differently from Taliban, differently from Iran, differently from what is happening in Lebanon and Yemen. And neoliberalism, maybe the economic structure is one part of the story, but the international relations part is also important in the sense that they want to also differentiate themselves. They want to mobilize specific forces, and also like in the international sphere. So one quick point there, and also what Elisa said about imperialism, I think is extremely important. Maybe it's a moment that we review or reflect on what we understand under imperialism. I think what was mentioned with South Africa and Sudan was also important, like the internal colonization of communities like Kurds, like Baluchis, in Arabs in Iran. They are also, I think, concepts that we need to integrate into our struggle. So we know now that it is not just West and anti-West, so the US and the anti-imperialists, but that there are quote unquote smaller power struggles in different regions with what Iran is doing in Iraq, in Syria. So yeah, just wanted to mention that maybe we reflect and we review what we understand with imperialism within different contexts. Thank you, everyone. Amazing talks.
Yeah, Fidaa, do you want to respond to this question and then be open for our next audience?
No, actually, just adding to the point, I wanted to mention actually Western Sahara as someone living in Palestine, also the Arab states, like many of the people, and some of them are very active in the Palestine solidarity circles. I mean, Arabs specifically. They are very silent on Western Sahara because Morocco is an Arab state. And despite the fact that the arm deals, the economic relationships between Morocco and the state of Israel are so strong. The same thing with Turkey and Israel. It's the same thing. And yeah, people do not understand those, do not understand, but they are not very, I don't know how to frame that. It is just overlooked. People do not want to get involved because the occupier is an Arab state. Yeah, just that.
Thank you very much. I just wanna برای 20 دقیقه آخری که از این پنل مونده دوباره میخوام یادآوری بکنم که اگر سوال یا کامنتی رو میخواین به فارسی بگین یا بنویسین حتما میتونین و ما میتونیم ترجمه بکنیم. I just gonna bring us back to something Nasreen also wrote, and I feel, you know, the presence of this gap that maybe we're observing in this space of, while you know, we are very caught up and shackled by the kind of violence that the imperialism is doing to us, and how they stealing, you know, instrumentalizing our fight, and there is in a way sometimes a reaction of talking about those very kind of basic, as people have like kind of called it in the chat, violences that are in the everyday. And yeah, I just thought that it would be a good time maybe for anyone to kind of reflect, like talk to those of our audiences who are talking to us from Iran, and you know that how talking against compulsory hijab is being instrumentalized by the West so they can kind of come and save us is not the most close suppression, and it is about that every day that they want to go out they have to put that scarf on still, and the humiliation of that, and that is much closer. And yeah, so if anyone kind of can talk I guess there is sorry I don't know, like as I just feel like there is a need to make this connectedness of the struggles much more kind of easy to translate. And there is a gap where we see that there are group of people in this chat here with us who mostly are also like myself, probably we're studying outside Iran. We are from the diaspora, so we there is so much more, there is less possibility even for ourselves to talk about the violence that our own governments are kind of imposing on us, because you kind of feel like that this is part of the bigger problem of the world order. But there is something on the everyday violence that then some people are experiencing that sometimes feels like it's being overlooked. It feels like we're talking about our warm seats here. Akanksha.
I've been thinking about this for so many years in the classroom context as well, and obviously in the organizing context as well, because of the way the conditions of protest and the conditions of, the larger narrative and the larger policies of whatever we call the West towards the rest of the world have been. I feel like, yeah, you're right. There becomes a space where we are mostly trying to speak about these issues, but only as a pushback against this Western European narrative often, right? Like, so we talk about the co-option of women in the struggle in Iran. We're talking about all of these things. And there is a limitation of these spaces within the left, within the UK, as well as I think maybe even beyond the UK, to actually discuss the everyday realities. And this is something that then only happens in really small spaces, especially for those of us who are living away from our contexts and for whatever reason, study, work, exile, various reasons why we end up where we end up. It becomes a even more insular conversation because we are unable to connect with the larger left spaces often, because the larger left spaces are so focused on these other narratives, which are important, but are not the full picture. And there's no space. And it's actually happened sometimes that if I have happened to say something about the patriarchy of Indian men, I have a well-meaning leftist friend who says, well, all men, like to tell me that, like, no, it's okay. It's okay. I'm talking about this very specific everyday lived reality of the state violence and patriarchy, and often religious violence of upper caste Hinduism, or even other religions, and how do we actually have these conversations? And these conversations then keep happening in smaller spaces like here or other spaces, which then don't sometimes connect to the larger left conversations or organizing spaces or even pedagogical political education spaces within this context of diaspora. And I don't have any answers, but I hear you on this, like they get sidelined, and where do we go with that?
Exactly. Yeah, also an example, Elisa mentioned in Latin America how it was the support, showing support for Iranian women by the Latin left was making them to be having labeled as they are supporting America, and that simplistic kind of translation. Nasreen, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Thank you for, can you hear me? Hi. Hi, everybody. So I am so glad that hearing this concept from you in this session, because I'm also living as a diaspora member in Canada, and I am really struggling once I want to discuss this hijab problem in Iran with the group who are mainly in the left side of the opposition, and it's not easy to make a common idea about this problem. And I believe it's because the situation for women in Iran and Afghanistan and partially in Saudi Arabia is an exception situation, which is the total mandatory for hijab, makes the normal and daily life of Iranian women under some kind of pressure, which may not be easily explain to the other women around the world. So normally this problem would be shaded by the other like a big problems like the economic problem or imperialism problem, and if you struggle more than normal, then you are always blamed as you are part of the pro Western group or pro-American because of just struggling too much about this. And it's a very, very good, important thing that we explain the situation from the women point of view to the other group around the world. So the same situation that might be in Western countries, that the women with hijab are kind of discriminated. In the other side, in Iran, the women without hijab are discriminated. And that is the voice which I believe is not loud enough in diaspora, and it makes our situation kind of problematic. I want to know the other group ideas about it. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to read the Zana Azad's comment as well, who's writing that Iranian women will not retrieve or go back. Since a year and a half, these women have been paying the price daily on their own, and without any basic emotional support. You could be arrested in the middle of the street, or they can kidnap you or stop your car in the middle of the street or take your car from you. In the bank or any official government organization, they don't serve you. You're not being supported from family or those around you, and so many of your friends are either awaiting really long imprisonments or they have just been released. Imagine you have to have a pen name to just join a conference, or choose a fake name to just come to the conference, and the isolation that is being spoken about for Iranian and Afghan women is the most intense it has ever been. Sabiha?
I don't remember what I wanted to, in answer to what this is, but I was thinking, oh yeah, right, so this paradox, like how do you celebrate Erdogan, right? And we have these trades with Israel. How do you celebrate the king of Morocco and you don't speak for Western Sahara, etc.? And I think, right, one of because we're also conditioned, right, to accept the idea of the nation state as this thing that is good, right, and that's going to give us some sort of stability in our lives. And right, to the extent that we also buy into my problem is not yours, your problems are not mine, etc., etc. But, and I think, so let's say a young Moroccan who speaks out against his kings, like what are his chances? Okay, I said he, it could be anyone. Where do you go? Where do you travel? Where do you seek refuge? Every nation state out there has its own mechanisms, right, of closing down on activism, but also racializing, gendering it, right, depending who you are. Everything you say is taken out of context, reshaped, etc. And yeah, maybe it's a bit bleak, right? But I think ultimately one must we must admit that the nation state is the worst invention, arguably the worst invention in the history of humanity. And this is why when something happens in Iran, we should all be concerned. But also when it happens in the UK, presumably a first world country, we should also all be concerned. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I think as a last question before we wrap up, Mehta has asked Akanksha if about any solidarity in India with the Iranian women, and kind of does the issue of the hijab play a role?
I think that because what is happening in India and several parts of India is that the state is actually making it mandatory to not wear hijab when you work in the public sector. So because of its targeting of Muslim women in particular. So for example, in the state of Karnataka, which is in South India and quite a large state, the government had passed a ruling that girls cannot wear hijab to schools and women cannot wear hijab to colleges, universities. And if you work in the public sector, like a teacher, or in any kind of public government state-related job, you can't. So there has been a lot of struggle against being able to wear the hijab. But again, I think feminist movements have also pointed out that these struggles are essentially the same, where the state is telling you what you can and cannot do because of its authoritarianism and because of how it wants to control particular people and particular bodies at different times. So there has also been that narrative and that at least that symbolic solidarity, that we understand what the women in Iran are going through, given that we are in some sense fighting similar violences of the state imposing these things. But because the conditions are so different right now, given that we have an active anti-Muslim campaign and an active anti-Muslim party in power that is doing everything it can to diminish the rights of Muslim people in India and to consider them non-Indian, the struggles become quite different. And that is the complexity of the moment and the geography and how it connects.
Thank you so much. So we have 5 minutes left to the end of this panel, and I really see that it's so broad, these conversations, and really probably it's very quite hard to bring all of it together. And maybe we can kind of finish on taking maybe 30 seconds and bringing Elif's Irish friend's question back, and actually really thinking about what can we do in this moment? If this moment was speaking to us, and probably by this moment, if the ghosts of solidarities before us and those who have come before us and the knowledge that we hold in our land and all of that could speak to us, what would have said? I'll let maybe everyone kind of think about it, and I want to actually open this to everyone here, to the all 55 people, and I'm going to say it in Farsi as well. I think that can be, we're probably not going to have time to read all of it, but it can be a good collection of really thinking, if this moment was speaking to us, what would it say? و میخواستم خواهش کردم از همه کسایی که اینجا هستن، اگر میخواستن فکر بکنن، اینو سخنرانامون قراره به این پاسخ جواب بدن، ولی به خودتون فرصت بدین که یک لحظه فکر بکنیم اگر این لحظه با ما میتونست حرف بزنه شاید بهمون چی میگفت، چه راهنمایی میکرد، و سعی کنیم در تماس باشیم با اون واقعا علمی و دانشی که درمون هست اگر به قلبمون برگردیم. میتونین تو چت بنویسین، اگر میخواین اسمتون نباشم میتونین تو یک قسمت Q&A به طور ناشناس بذارین و شاید برای هممون، برای جمله هاتون واسه یک کسی راهگشا باشه. So yeah, I'll let you guys speak. I'm just going to also mention that if anyone wants to do it in English anonymously and not put it in the chat, they can do so in the Q&A section, and we might have a nice collection. So who wants to go first?
Shall I start, since I
Since you probably have thought about it before as well.
You know what? honestly, I actually haven't, which is part of the issues. That's why it's going to be a very short one. I think the main thing this moment would say to us, me, is don't be afraid.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Bueno, para mí el evento ha significado el desafío que tenemos las feministas de construir un nuevo tipo de pensamiento y de construir el conocimiento. ¿Qué quiero decir con esto? Que hay tantas cosas, es tan complejo, todo lo que hemos estado hablando, y que por lo tanto el que nos juntemos posibilita ese pensamiento más allá de lo dicotómico, más allá de lo binario, y creo que justamente uno de nuestros desafíos es eso, ¿no? Es cómo poder empezar o seguir profundizando en estos pensamientos más complejos, que eso nos sirve para también pensar esta realidad compleja y poder justamente luchar contra estas injusticias.
Thank you, Elisa. So Elisa says that we have there are great challenges ahead, and we should definitely carry on, right, with thinking seriously about the knowledge we produce as feminists that can help us go, beyond this reality. And if I can add, this is not Elisa, but I think, so I sit a lot on these panels and groups, and we often forget South America. We only recently woke up to Africa, and I think there's a lot of links that are yet to be made, and hopefully we will, continue doing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maya.
Hi. Yeah. So I think because we were saying, we're following a genocide live from our phones, I mean, there's no excuse whatsoever. So we owe it to the victims of this genocide. Like, even if we're tired, I think that moment will look at us and say, you owe it to them. You can't stop.
I don't want to force, you don't have to say anything if you don't feel like it, but Akanksha and Fidaa, if you'd like to.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to second Elif, that it's a very scary moment, and this scary moment, actually, I felt very few after a few weeks, maybe actually early in October. I shared a tweet. I before the genocide went full genocide, and I wrote, "It is very scary what is happening," and that was early in October. I shared it in the chat. They want to make out of Gaza a lesson for all rich of the earth that chose the path of resistance, resisting the system. And if we want a future for us, for everyone, social justice, economic justice, for all of us, we should keep resisting. We should organize, seek the nearest group that is organizing in our neighborhood and join the struggle, because they are after us now, but this could happen in Chile. This could happen in Turkey. It could happen to everyone. It is a killing machine. You are either with the killing machine or with the bright future, the community that is based in care that we want for ourselves, that we want for the next generation. So if we fight for that, we should just keep fighting. Yeah.
Akanksha, say something.
Just agree with everyone here. And my friend Islam always points out that any normality that we are seeking now is coming with the death and blood of people in Gaza and everywhere else. And I think there is no sort of going back to anything before. Like this has changed the conditions of our existence, our life, and our solidarity and resistance and struggle in every single way. And that's how we move now. Like there's no other way, because any other way would be complicity.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I know that the time of the panel is over now. I thank you so much, and I think just gonna finish by the comment, also the response that someone said in the chat as well, that until we have peace and freedom, it's resistance, fight, care, and sisterhood. And I guess, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And hopefully we keep it up. We will share everyone's details after checking what profile they would like to be contacted on هر از باش social media. Thank you. تمام اطلاعات اسپیکرها رو بعداً به اشتراک میذاریم برای اینکه بتونیم باشون تماس بگیریم. Thank you. Bye.